Welcome to the Alcohol Free Life podcast, brought to you by thesoberclub.com. I'm Janie Lee Grace. This is for you if you've quit the booze or you'd like to, or maybe you're just sober curious. I'll bring you tips and motivation without any judgment, and there'll be inspiration from experts, quit-lit authors, and sober heroes. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. I hope you are. I hope you've had a good week and then been enjoying some of the sunshine and all. And I hope you enjoyed the last couple of podcasts. I've had a few really nice messages from people who have just come across the podcast, which is always great because then I can say, well, you've got like literally hundreds of episodes to go back on, which is really nice. And actually this week I'm going to share a little clip from a podcast I did a long time ago because it's very relevant. And, rather than reinvent the wheel and do it all over again, it's a topic that I want to share with you. So that's the reason. Before I get into that, though, let me share that I'm going to be part of the Sobriety is the new epic summit speaker series, if you like. It's going to be really exciting. I'm amongst a lot of sober fluencers, that fabulous word, lots of sober heroes, and I'm just one of the speakers. So I'll share the link in the show notes. It's free. It lasts for 14 days. As they say on the blurb, it's going to be epic. It's all about sort of positive sobriety, whether you're already sober or whether you've been sober for a while. It's all the different little twists and turns, and there's a whole bunch of great speakers. I'll be talking about literally holistic sobriety. So I hope you'll tune in for my talk and all of the others. As I say, it's free, but you just have to sign up. You just have to register. It's all organised by Sarah Treacy. So I'll put the link in the show notes to this. And of course, if you go to thesoberclub.com, you'll see the info for it right there. A quick mention as well that in terms of sober coach training, a couple of people messaged me and said, oh, I heard you mention on your podcast that you offer sober coach training, but I didn't really know, where to look. So I don't talk about it all the time because it's not for everyone, is it? But if you have quit the booze and you are thinking, I want to do something different, or I want to add some skills in, then it really is a whole new skill set that is provided, is delivered. It's, I think, the most comprehensive training out there. It is totally holistic. It doesn't equip you to work with people who are at rock bottom. So if you are from the kind of recovery world where you're wanting to work with people who are clinically dependent, this would not be the right training. But if you are, are feeling passionate about your own sobriety and really want to support others, or if you just want to lay those foundations and have all that understanding of how the brain works and great nutrition and how NLP can assist you, and looking back at the trauma that may have started it all off, and so much more, then do check out our training. We have one at the end of April that is full, and then we have another one in October. So if you were interested in getting in touch sooner rather than later, then you can absolutely be guaranteed a place. There's very few places because a lot of it is very much kind of one-to-one with me, very small groups. But drop me a message if it's of interest. There's absolutely no pressure. I'm a really big believer the right people show up. You get that kind of feeling in your gut that says, oh, this feels a bit scary, but I think it might be right for me. And unless you got that feeling, it probably isn't. But let's have a chat. If it is something you think you might be interested in, let's have a chat. You can just go to, again, thesoberclub.com, click on Become a Sober Coach if you want, more information about what I offer there. And also, if you are at the early stages and you're sober curious, or you're just thinking about, trying to really stay on this journey, because I think that can sometimes be the issue, can't it? So many people do really well, in inverted commas, for a few weeks or even a few months. And then, when everything's going good, suddenly the sun comes out and the wine witch says, well, you got this now, haven't you? Of course, you're fine. So yeah, you can just have one. Wouldn't it be nice? And the whole fading effect bias kicks in. And as we know, it's not exactly fab. And then you go back down the booze elevator. And that's often the point at which people recognize, okay, I need a little bit more support here to unpick what might be going on and to put in place some real strategies for staying on track. So that's where sober coaching comes in, and it can just be so incredibly supportive to work with a sober coach. So it just so happens that I have some availability. I have some slots free. So if you were looking to work with a sober coach, I do still offer one-to-one coaching myself, as well as training people to be coaches. So feel free to get in touch if you're interested. Oh, excuse me. If you're interested in coaching, I offer a one-off motivational session, or a package of sessions, or a kind of a support via WhatsApp, a kind of Janie in your pocket scenario, if that suits you better, if you're very time poor and you'd rather have almost like coaching on the go kind of thing. Also, for those people who really want to work in person, I know some people feel that way, we can do a kind of a blast session, as it were, a kind of a VIP day, I used to call it, when I was doing my media training. But you are absolutely a VIP as far as I'm concerned. So same thing, but we kind of blast it all out in a kind of a 1 day session, one-to-one in person, with a lovely lunch included. So that's another option. Anyways, drop me a message if any of that is of interest. And then linking to my guest today, we have our next Family Constellations set up. It's for Saturday, May the 10th in Hertfordshire. It's in Kings Langley, so it's about half an hour from London Euston, or near junction 20 on the M25. And I know I say this every time I talk about constellations, but I just wish it was a little easier to describe. I'm going to point you to go and have another look at Another Life, which is the slightly cheesy Netflix series, but it does feature constellations, and it's quite interesting to see how it's portrayed there. So if you really want to kind of get your head around what it is, then go and have a look at Another Life. Otherwise, just be completely open and come anyway, because if you look at the testimonials that I share on the various web pages, I mean, pretty much everyone says it's life-changing. I just posted a message on the Sober Club, and somebody wrote back and said, this really was life-changing for me. I can barely describe why, but it's changed everything in my perspective, in my relationships, in how I feel about myself. So it's amazing. If you can have a chance to experience Family Constellations, please do. And if you've been before, come again. I mean, I did, goodness, about 25 constellations, as well as doing a couple of sessions as a issue holder, as we call those people who do their own piece of work. But it's just fascinating. It gives you such a different insight into how people tick, into how we all carry unconscious stuff. It's, intergenerational trauma. It's held in cellular memory. This is not, by the way, only linked to addiction. Addiction sometimes comes up, but so does just about everything else. And it's not all doom and gloom either. It's a really kind of safe, held space where people just really feel able to share what's going on, but you don't have to kind of revisit all the trauma and kind of talk about it for 20 years. You can often get incredible clarity and literally closure, and I really mean a completely different perspective in a short session. So I can't recommend it enough. It's just not an easy sell, as it were. It's not easy to get people to come because people don't know enough about it. So anyways, I thought, because of that, and because several people have asked me about it recently, I thought I'd rerun just a clip of my interview with Mark Wolynn. He's very well known now. I'm very proud to say I think I was one of the first people from the UK to interview Mark on his book, It Didn't Start With You. It is a spectacularly good book. Everyone kind of learnt from Mark this incredible fact that we are all born from an egg in our grandmother's womb. Think about that. Think about that when you kind of go, oh, I'm not interested in anything to do with my family. Well, you know what? The cellular train is there. So, yeah, Mark is really incredible. The book is fantastic. So I thought I'd just give you a chance to hear a little bit of that interview. We just kind of come in halfway through a sentence, but you get the gist of our conversation. And I'll put the link to the book as well in the show notes. So for anyone who really has not got any clue what we're talking about, can you define for us then what inherited family trauma is?
Well, let's say one of our parents or grandparents had a significant trauma. They lost their mother or their father when they were young, or our mother or father, they were sent away, they were raised by a relative, they were placed in an orphanage, or maybe one of their siblings died tragically when they were young. And an event like this can break the heart of the family. But the reaction to the trauma doesn't necessarily stop with the people who experienced it. For example, the feelings, the sensation, specifically the stress response, the way the genes express, this can pass forward to the children and the grandchildren, affecting them in a similar way, even though they didn't personally experience the trauma.
It's incredible, isn't it? And I know it's only in relatively recent years that we've sort of started talking about this whole field of epigenetics and what it really means. And I was really struck when I read your book, when you explained something that I ought to have known, but I don't think I did know, that, just explain to us how, for a woman giving birth to a daughter, there's the grandmother's eggs in there as well.
Right. So when our grandmother is 5 months pregnant with our mother will have all the eggs. The female cell line, the egg line, stops dividing in the 5th month of pregnancy. So all the eggs that our mother has and she'll ever have will be embedded in her womb while she's embedded in our grandmother's womb. And of course, one of those eggs in our mother's womb is then us.
Yeah.
So really, you can look at in a way where 3 generations are sharing the same biological environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, tell us how this is kind of based in science, this stuff, in scientific research.
Okay. So as infants, we don't enter the world with a clean hard drive. You would think we do. They used to think we did. We entered the world that way. But to continue with this computer analogy, there seems to be an operating system already in place, one that contains the fallout from the traumas that our parents or grandparents experienced. And then here we are, born with fears and feelings that don't always belong to us. And when we look at the science, the trauma, a trauma in general, it changes us. Yeah. Literally, it causes a chemical change in our DNA. And this can change how our genes function, sometimes for generations. So technically, after this traumatic event, there'll be a chemical tag that attaches to our DNA and tells our cells to use or ignore certain genes so we can better deal with this trauma that just took place. And then the way our genes are affected changes how we act or feel. For example, we can become sensitive or reactive to situations that are similar to the original trauma, even if that trauma occurred in a past generation, so that we have a better chance of surviving it in this generation. I'll give you an example. Yeah. If our grandparents came from a war-torn country, so let's say people are being shot or bombs are going off or uniformed men are lining people up in the square and people are being taken away, our grandparents would develop and pass forward a particular skill set designed to help them deal with that trauma. So let's say they would develop a skill set of sharper reflexes or quicker reaction times or reactions to the violence they experienced or the violence they witnessed to help them survive this trauma. Well, that's what they're, in essence, passing forward. Now, the problem is here we are in the next generation inheriting a stress response with the dials set to 10, prepared for this war, prepared for this catastrophe that never arrives. And we rarely make the link that our anxiety, our hypervigilance, our depression, our addiction response is connected to our parents and our grandparents. We just think we're wired this way.
Yeah. Yeah. We just think that's how we are. How did you get involved in this work?
Well, many years ago, without knowing why I was doing what I was doing, I had symptoms that I couldn't explain. I always like to say many of us are living with this mystery, these feelings, this depression, this anxiety, these symptoms, and we have no clue as to what's going on. For me, 30 years ago, I began to lose the vision in one of my eyes. And I went to the doctors and I was diagnosed with this chronic form of retinopathy. And the doctors then told me that there was no cure for it. And the way that it was progressing, because I had it in both eyes, I would likely lose the vision in the other eye too. And here I am thinking that I'm going to be completely blind and there's no cure. And Western medicine at the time, even now, has no cure for it. So I was desperate to find some help. And I went on a search for healing. What that meant is I'd hear somebody talk, or I learned of somebody that I thought had answers, or I read a book. Anyway, this search leads me halfway around the globe, as far as Indonesia, where I learned from several wise teachers who taught me some fundamental principles, one of which is the importance of healing my relationship with my parents. My parents. But before I could do that, I had to heal what stood in the way, inherited family trauma, which I don't realize that at the time. But specifically, the anxiety that I had inherited from each of my grandparents, all of whom were orphaned in some way. 3 of them lost their mothers when they were babies, and the 4th grandparent lost her father when she was 1. So ultimately, she would have lost her mother in the grief. And this anxiety was the real cause of my vision loss. I remember, just like my parents, I had inherited this feeling of being broken from my mother's love. And this was what had been passed down in my family because, of course, they all lose their mothers. And I remember being a small boy, maybe I'm 5 or 6 years old, and I feel panicked every time my mom would leave the house, and I'd run into her room and I'd cry. I'd open her drawers and cry into her scarves and her nightgowns, thinking that I'd never see her again, and that her smell would be the only thing that I had left, which would have been true for my grandparents who all lose their moms when they're little. All they would have had was some piece of clothing or blanket, with a mother's smell. 40 years later, I shared this with my mom. I said, Mom, when you'd leave, I used to cry into your clothes. And she said, oh, I did that too when my mother left the house. And then my sister, reading the book, said, honey, I did the same thing when Mom left the house too. I cried into her clothes. So really, this was the family pattern that we're all inheriting, this feeling of we'll never have our mother. And, it led to a broken attachment. And so after healing this broken attachment with my mom, a strange thing happened, Janie. My vision came back, my sight came back.
Wow.
And then afterwards, I felt compelled to share these principles that I had learned. And ultimately, I developed this method for healing the effects of inherited family trauma.
Incredible. So from what you've just described then, and certainly from some of the work that I've seen with Family Constellations, it's important then to be connected, or at least to know some information about your family of origin. I mean, what about for people who maybe don't, if you hadn't have known or hadn't have had a way of knowing that had happened, if you see what I mean, what happens then? Is it how important is it to know exactly what the stories or the realities were for the past generations.
It's important if we have the information, but just as you said, Janie,
you might not have.
Yeah, a lot of us don't have it because we're adopted, or our parents don't talk about the past, or our parents are deceased. But what I've discovered is this information lives in our trauma language, both our verbal and our nonverbal trauma language. So it's in our fears, it's in our unexplained symptoms, it's in our self-destructive behaviors, it's in our self-sabotaging behaviors. It lives in the symptoms of an illness or the symptoms of our addiction that appear after maybe an unsettling event takes place. It lives in our relationship struggles, the repeated ways we deal with partners, the way we deal with money, the way we deal with success. All of this can give us a glimpse of what may have happened in our family, even if that story's been lost or kept secret, and can help us explain why we feel the way we feel.
Years and years ago, people probably would have sat around as families and shared stories and passed these stories on from generation to generation. But you're right, in our culture, we don't tend to do that. I remember a friend of mine always trying to get his dad to share stuff about the war that he was in, about the Second World War. And he just wouldn't talk about it. It just absolutely closed off. But actually, it would have been super helpful for everyone if that conversation could have been had.
Absolutely. Any way we cut it, memories of trauma, memories of our parents' traumas are imprinted in their sperm cells and egg cells. And that goes for our grandparents too. And then this information passes forward to us. And then as a result, you and I can be born with altered brains that prepare us to biologically cope with traumas that are similar to the traumas that our parents experienced or our grandparents are experienced, or in the case you talk about, the war trauma that his father experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. And how come, some people, seem to have a lot of issues with this, and some people don't. Not everyone manifests with this, or at least we don't know on the surface.
No, that's absolutely true. So what I've seen, most of us have trauma in our family history, but you're right. What is that piece? What seems to anchor these traumas? Why do some of us seem to manifest them? What creates these repetitions? So what I see is when traumas aren't talked about, or the healing is incomplete, which is common because the pain is too great, the grief is too great, the embarrassment, the shame. People don't, we run away from what's uncomfortable and we move toward what's easy. But that leaves unresolved traumas in our family history. Or what I also see is people in our family history or our family system, they're excluded or rejected. For example, we don't talk about alcoholic grandpa who drank away all the money, left grandma with 5 kids. We just dislike him and we don't want to be like him. So whenever there's not any resolution, then aspects of these traumas can show up in later generations. In other words, unconsciously, we'll repeat the pattern, or we'll share a similar unhappiness or a similar behavior until that trauma finally has a chance to heal. Hey, Freud observed this over 100 years ago when he talked about repetition compulsion, the idea that traumas will continue until that trauma has a chance to seek a better outcome. I look at it this way. The contraction of the trauma is always seeking its expansion, which is so the trauma really gives us an opportunity for healing for ourselves, healing for our family, healing for our children.
Yeah. And so, obviously the question everyone's going to want to know the answer to is then how do we heal then? And first off, how do at what point do most people sort of maybe even start to recognize, okay, there might be something going on here? How can they then begin to heal?
Okay, so you're asking me two good questions, and I think they both deserve. Let me start with how do we recognize it in ourselves, and then let me go to how we heal. I think that's a good
great.
a good
Thank you.
sequence. So how do we recognize it? That we can be born with an anxiety or a depression. That's true, and we can never separate it from the events of the previous generation, which is true. We don't think about that. But we can also experience a fear or a symptom that strikes suddenly or unexpectedly, maybe when we reach a certain age, age 30 in the family. Maybe age 30 was the age grandpa died and grandma was a widow and she never marries again. Or it can also happen not just at ages. It can happen at certain milestones or certain events in our lives. For example, as soon as we get married, that can be a triggering event. In the book, you remember I talked about this woman. She loves her fiance. She thinks he's the greatest guy in the world. But then as soon as she's married, she feels trapped and she doesn't understand it. So when we looked in her family history, we saw that both grandmothers had been given away as child brides, one at age 9 and one at age 12 in Iraq, to much older men. And then what was further interesting were the traumas expressed differently in both her sisters. The one sister married a man 30 years older, like the grandmothers, and the other sister refused to even date at all, lest she be trapped. So one trigger can be when we go to get married. Another trigger can be when we move to a new place. And then suddenly we feel depressed, even if we moved across town, because our ancestors, maybe when they lived in a country, perhaps they were persecuted or they were forced out of their homeland. And, they never, they always longed for their family members who were left behind, or the people who died, or they moved to this new place where they felt like foreigners. So, that could be a triggering event, moving, or we get rejected by our partner. And even if we only dated this partner for 3-4 months, all of a sudden we feel this grief is insurmountable. But it's not that grief because we weren't with that partner that long. It's taking us back to a much earlier grief, perhaps a break in the attachment with our mothers when we were little. Another triggering event can be having a child. And then there's this ancestral alarm clock that starts ringing inside us and saying, misery, pain. I one time worked with this woman. She was consumed with anxiety and she had no idea what was going on. For example, I said, let's ask some questions here. Let's look at this anxiety. When did it start? And she said, I don't know, 7 months ago. And I said, what happened 7, 8, 9 months ago? And she said, well, that's when I got pregnant. And I said, what's the worst fear that you have about being pregnant or having a baby? And immediately she said, I'll harm my baby. I'll harm my baby. That's my fear. And I asked her if she'd ever harmed a baby. And she said, of course not. And then I said, did anyone in your family ever harm a baby? And she's just about to say no. And then this memory arises and she says, oh, wait a minute. My grandmother, when she was a young woman, she lit a candle and then that caught the curtains on fire and the house on fire, but the baby was upstairs sleeping and she couldn't get the baby out. And then she said, but we were never allowed to talk about it. Right. And in that moment, that's what I talked about earlier with you, is when situations or people are exiled or pushed away or not allowed to be talked about or not allowed to be resolved. In that moment, she made the link that she was carrying the terror from her grandmother's life, and then we could break the pattern. So absolutely. Those are ways in which we can tell if we're carrying trauma. And then your other question, which is really important, how do we heal? So healing, it's not that difficult. It's not that difficult. I mean, healing for inherited trauma or early trauma is still the same. We've got to have positive experiences that can change our brain. And then we need to practice the new feelings and the new sensations that arise, that are associated with these new positive experiences. So, and then when we do that, we create new neural pathways in our brain. That's part of how we heal. But also we stimulate the release of feel-good neurotransmitters in our brain, serotonin, dopamine, GABA. We also stimulate the release of feel-good hormones in our body, estrogen, oxytocin, even the very genes involved in our body stress response can begin to function in a different way. I just want to tell the listener, we can change the way our DNA expresses. So these positive experiences can be practices that we have to continue practicing, practices of receiving comfort. That can be a practice. Or receiving support. That can be a practice. I teach that in the book. Or I also teach how to have feelings of compassion for ourselves, for what we went through, or for our parents for what they went through, our grandparents for what they went through. Or it can be, these practices can be a gratitude practice. Yeah. Like Oprah used to tell us. Oprah used to say, have a gratitude practice. Well, why? Because these types of experiences feed the prefrontal cortex and can help us reframe the stress response so it has a chance to downregulate. Also, a loving kindness practice or mindfulness, really anything that allows us to feel strength or peace or joy inside, because these experiences, I said, can feed the prefrontal cortex and help us calm that stress response. So ultimately, the idea is to pull energy away or traction away from the limbic brain, the limbic system, our overactive amygdala, and bring energy, bring engagement to the forebrain, specifically the prefrontal cortex again, where we can integrate these new experiences and our brains can change. Janie, we know from mindfulness studies that just practicing mindfulness can actually shrink the amygdala and thicken the cortex, the prefrontal cortex.
Thank you, Mark. The book is It Didn't Start With You. And as I've already said, please, please, please check out our next Family Constellations. I work with a trauma expert who's been doing this stuff for 30 years. It's on Saturday, the 10th of May in Hertfordshire. If you look at the link in the show notes, or if you go to thesoberclub.com/events, you'll find all the information there. There's also a blog post where I endeavor to describe it in a little bit more detail. But the bottom line is just come and experience it. Come with an open mind, and you'll almost certainly leave feeling more compassionate, more open-hearted, possibly feeling as though literally your whole life has changed for the better. Do check it out if you possibly can. Just a quick reminder that, I really do want you to reach out if you're struggling. Obviously, I'd love you to join us in the Sober Club. It's really supportive. It's not expensive. It's full of content. There's so much stuff there. So much cheerleading goes on there. It doesn't matter whether you're day one or thinking about quitting, or whether you've been sober for 10 years. There's literally something for everyone, because we focus on well-being. So come and join us in the Sober Club if you'd like to, thesoberclub.com. But if that's not your thing, or if you are already connected with other groups or whatever, but you're just feeling, you've got that kind of fuck it button hanging around somewhere in your mind, then reach out. You can absolutely reach out to me. I'm very easy to find on social media at Janie Lee Grace. Just drop me a message. I will reply. If I see the message, I'll reply. I really will. I'll just do what I can to hold the space for you, because that reaching out part, that's the bit I didn't do. for so many years. I didn't do that piece. I just assumed that I was strong enough. I was pretty good at holding the rest of my life together. So why on earth couldn't I do this bit? So I never reached out to anybody ever. Until a book landed in my lap, and thank God, I saw the light. But I don't want that for you. If you know that it's time, if you know your life would be better without the booze, then do it. Just do it. But get some support. Get somebody holding that vision for you. And I don't mean, your partner, your best friend, because with the best friend in the world, they may not have been there, done it, got the t-shirt. You need that support from someone who's been there and done it, not just someone who, likes you a lot. Save this bit, save the agony and the worry of it all, and the awkward questions for those people who've been through it. I remember having so many questions in the early weeks, and I had nobody to ask, is it normal to have really weird leg cramps in the first few weeks? I now know it is. Is it normal to feel this emotional, complete emotional roller coaster for absolutely no good reason? Are those things normal? Well, yeah, they are. But you need to chat to someone who's been through it, so that, they give you their love bombing. Basically, that's what we do in the Sober Club. So if you're struggling, please reach out. Mark that 10th of May in your diary if you can possibly come. Don't forget, I do have some slots for coaching if that's of interest. And I will see you same time next week. Have a fantastic week. And if you're doing this thing, give yourself a massive hug. You're worth it. Thank you for listening to the Alcohol Free Life podcast, brought to you by the Sober Club. Please rate and review. And if you want support, accountability and inspiration, and you want to live your best life without the booze, check out thesoberclub.com.